how many times are kids having the experience of having some kind of a learning need or meaning need that's fluctuating in their body, in the core of their being, but shutting it down, not acting on it, avoiding it, And I would argue that for most kids, that's happening thousands and thousands and thousands of times, right? And it's just kind of blurring and dulling their sensitivities to those fluctuations, right? And this is what leads to the propensity for I mean, there's cultural reasons too, but this is what leads to this awkward reluctance to put oneself out, right? Is this deep insecurity in feeling confident in yourself. Like we talked about once before, never met a toddler that said, I'm going to give up on walking.
Yeah.
That kind of distrust in learning is learned. And it's not learned by single episodes. It's learned by the chronic background of the way the whole enchilada works in school and in home. And that's what we talk about. What are we going to do about this? That's why it's so important to change the orientation of the system, because focusing on this episode and this episode, we can tweak them all we want. If the background radiation of the whole thing continues to create this dampening, aversion yielding, tunnel that these kids are going through, it's not going to change much.
Yeah. That brings up the whole question of what do we do? What do we do? Right.
So, like in our last exchange, we were talking a little bit in the messaging that I think my response to the question about parents was, first of all, parents and teachers both need to, be coming from this place of being stewards, right, of the healthiness of the learning of their children, whether they're a parent or they're a teacher. That, I mean, whether you care about their physical health, their emotional health, their academic achievement, their ability to relate to themselves, their nutritional health, how well they get along with their neighbors or friends or buddies or whatever you care about, right? Yeah. Ultimately, the destiny of that thing you care about is connected to how healthy that child learns.
I think maybe some parents pull back from taking care of the health of their child's learning because maybe we've come to see education as the domain of the school. And maybe parents feel, I don't know how to help my child with this problem, so I'm going to leave it to the professional, so to speak.
Right. This is why I start learning stewards with the thing. There's nothing that's going to happen until we reframe our conception of learning itself.
Yeah.
Because what you were just describing about parents and the way they think about this in school, learning is what happens in school, right?
Yeah.
Right? That's the problem.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying is how do we get them past that point, right?
Because no matter the person, right? If you really can dialogue with them, if you can have a conversation with them, you can reveal to them, get them to start recognizing they are who they are because of their learning. That it needs to be a first person real shift in how they think about learning, not an abstract academic label that they're persuaded to believe in because some expert says so, but rather a first person realization insight that, I mean, whether I'm a good engineer or I'm good at running a team like Donnie is, what made Donnie successful? Did he learn to do that in school?
Definitely not.
Yeah,
but he did learn it.
But he did learn to do that, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't born to do that. It wasn't genetically endowed that he would do that. It wasn't in his mom's food. He learned to do that, right?
Yeah.
So whether somebody's really whatever their hobby's about, making crochet or making a great meal or whatever it is that somebody thinks they're great about, that they take pride in, they got that from learning.
Yeah.
So when they continue to think of learning as this academic thing that happens, abstractly and outside of the home, that's so misorienting their whole being.
I agree. That's the whole thing, is that they misoriented. Yeah.
Yep. So the fundamental misorientation is related to the operative definition they have about learning, thinking of learning, again,
Right.
like we talked about before, as if it's this ancillary mental utility for acquiring knowledge and skills, rather than it's the central dynamic through which I'm becoming who I'm becoming all of my life.
Yeah.
Right. So the more that they really get that, the more that that's true for them, that they see it, and that they're now on their own course of starting to see the world through that lens, see that in their children, see that in their spouse, see that in how they're going to deal with tomorrow's conflict with their mothers or with their spouses or with their bosses or whatever. That it's all about learning, right? The more that becomes real for them, then we can go on to the next part of the conversation, which is, well, all learning is not equal, right? Then we can start to get into stutters and miraculous intersections and the difference between healthy modes of participation and self-sabotaging learning. Because kids that are in the back of the classroom wanting to avoid being noticed, they're learning all the time too. They're just learning in ways that are sabotaging their learning.
Yeah.
They're learning to get ever better at being invisible.
Yeah.
Right. So we're always learning. It's just that all the time that all of that learning isn't necessarily good for us.
Right.
Right. So, but we can't get to that until we see learning as being more than what we do at school in some academic or professional compartmentalized way.
Yeah. This is for my way of thinking, like if we can help parents like Donnie to shift past school completely, right? Just bypass that and go to what you talk about. So the idea of miraculous intersections is kind of a bit further along this path of yours of learning about learning, right? Yeah. And just but it's kind of exciting that we don't need to solve the problems happening at school necessarily. We can just, if we can help people get to that point of first person learning, and they kind of understand, they internally understand learning the way that you frame it, right? Then I think they're in a position to help their children, to steward the health of their own child's learning.
Right. Yeah.
But I think yeah, keep going, please.
No, go ahead.
No, I just want to say that I think there are parents who want to help their children, but the way that learning has been framed in their own mind or experienced by them is holding them back from participating in their child's learning.
Yeah, I agree. That's the fulcrum, though. Because they love enough, they care enough, they're interested enough.
Yeah.
Right? They're just misoriented. And so that's why the key, the single biggest thing here is that orientation shift. The rest of it becomes pretty obvious once you got the right set of glasses on.
Well, that's what's exciting to me, is that it's just like a shift can just literally change everything.
Yeah, I think so. I think, that's the tagline on Learning Stewards, right? I mean, if we change how we think about learning, it will change how we learn about everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That fulcrum, that change is not, it is kind of the challenge, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's always been. Exactly. But, and part of that happens by just lowering the amount of inefficiency in the system so that learning isn't so difficult for kids, so that there's more of that. And part of it has to do with explicitly reorienting enough adults so that some kind of a snowball can grow out of that. But it takes all these things are, different parts of the same pool.
But the positive, hopeful message for me is that it's not as though you have parents who don't care about their children and we've got to try to get them to care. That most parents deeply care and they want to help their own children. And maybe they have the ability built into them to learn how to learn and to learn how to guide or help their child.
Well, they're doing it all the time, but because they at earlier stages in their life shamed out of paying attention to learning or never learned to pay. Again, the toddler is not conscious of learning to speak better. The toddler's not conscious of learning to walk better, right? It's just, it's a proprioceptive extension of presence into new dimensions of function and capabilities, right? So they're not meta-conscious. They're not aware of them doing it in the same way. What we're talking about is becoming aware of learning in a different way than the way it's been socialized / educated into us.
Right. And once parents can make that shift, they're a lot closer to being able to help their children than maybe they realize.
Yeah, I think they are. I think you're right. I mean, no, there's no question that there's an awful lot of parents that are so busy with the struggle of survival that they don't have the bandwidth, so to speak. But they do care. And if you can connect that care and that love, even in what time they do have available, and shift the way they're paying attention, they can be radically more effective in whatever time they do have.
Yeah.
You know?